As I was looking at this sheet that we looked at in the morning, and at the same time think of these qualities that we talked about just before lunch, I thought of the illustration of glasses that are bifocal. We need to have bifocal lenses, in the sense of having short-range goals that we want to see by God's grace built into our lives and into the lives of people. But at the same time, we want to think in terms of the coming 20 years, the coming 50 years, or the rest of our lives. What should we be looking for? Because I feel if we have certain qualities for a year or half a year or longer or shorter, there might be a temptation to want to achieve results. And I believe results is a very dangerous pressure that we might struggle with and might really be hard on people that we work with and hard on us. If we just kind of leave the results to God and work on being faithful in doing what God has called us to do. And I believe this sheet that I have is the upper part of the lens. It's the long range. I feel this is for me before it is for the people I'm working with. It's for me to live and to practice. And if I'm living it and practicing it and God is doing something in my life, automatically it's going to be transmitted and taught to people that are with me. So let's go back to this sheet, read it again, and perhaps we could have some discussion before I go into another point on some of the other points. If you have a question, a comment, something you don't like, something you think I should change in it, I would really appreciate that, and then we will carry on. Point 1, he is learning to satisfy his essential needs to be loved and to have dignity through the sufficiency of Christ. For instance, this statement goes with Christ-centeredness. But to say, be Christ-centered, well, I want to be Christ-centered. How do I go about becoming Christ-centered? Perhaps one way is to see that in trying to, that verse in Jeremiah 2:13, it says, for my people have done two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living water, and went about building for themselves cisterns that hold no water. Now, how does this happen? An Egyptian who is married and who has a daughter, he's an engineer living in Cairo, he finds it's impossible to have money enough to go and get an apartment. So he is living with his parents, and there are struggles between his mother and his wife. So he decided to leave his wife and his daughter at his father's home and go to Saudi Arabia and work for 3 years, making money to come back and get an apartment. So he went there to Saudi Arabia, and he'll visit Egypt only once a year, to the degree that his daughter wouldn't recognize him when he would come to visit. After 3 years, he got enough money, and he bought an apartment in an area called Madinat Nasr, which is close to Heliopolis, quite a good area, and he had enough money to buy a second-hand small car. Now he became a man who is, an ideal, or a person who is a model. He'll go to visit his parents in Shobra area, a relatively poorer area. You'll find his parents are proud of him. They'll say, look, to the younger generation, look how your cousin, went to Saudi Arabia, had money, he had a car, he has his own apartment. And boy, his inside feels good. He feels significant. After a while, he found the neighbors he's living with are richer. His car is smaller than the cars of the people living in the building. He even noticed that the gate man, sitting at his chair down, as this young man goes down to his work, the gate man hardly, greets him. He pretends he's getting up, but he just moves his shoulder, but he's still sitting. But when the man of the Mercedes or the Volvo goes for his car, the gate man runs to clean the windows for him. And so he began seeing he's insignificant because he has a second-hand, old, small car. So he put a new tape in his recorder. If I get a new car, I'll be significant. He didn't say it that clearly, but that's what unconsciously he was saying to himself. So he started having another job in the afternoon and would work harder, etc., until finally they raised enough money and they bought a new car. Now when he got that new car and the first time he drives it to his home, he just wished everybody in the building will go to the balconies and just see him. Boy was sitting in that seat, it really made him feel good. But it did so happen that nobody was on the balconies. For a month or two, that car really filled an emptiness in his life. Until they went to visit neighbors of theirs in the building, and they heard that these people has refurnished their apartment. They had wallpaper, they got a video, and this kind of thing. And boy, he went back home miserable. He would look at the white walls and wonder how could he live in this apartment, and on and on. Now, if you see a little child playing by the beach, he digs a little, ditch in the sand, and then he runs with his bucket, fills it with water, puts the water in the ditch, and he's happy it's full. After a few seconds, the water goes down. So he runs, fills it, and fills that thing. And then after a while, it goes down. And he could do it 10 times or more. And we look at him and say, "Whew, how foolish he is." And we could be as foolish as that boy. But, we do it in big deals. He does it in small deals. And I believe nothing can satisfy us, really. Nothing can satisfy us. No ministry, no disciples, no church planting, no money, no position can satisfy our inner longings, right? Like a relationship with God. The Lord is my portion. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Point 2, he's learning to renew his mind, to change the tape through the word of God, avoiding foolishness and growing in wisdom. For instance, this engineer friend of ours, he's foolish because he thought a new car will fill that emptiness. Point 3, he's learning to become aware of his secret goals and motives behind his outward behavior. He repents of sinful motives and goals and is learning to choose goals and behavior that bring glory to God. Remember one time I was on my way to preach in a youth group on the other side of the city, and as I was driving, I was praying hard, saying, "Lord, use me tonight." And then I found myself praying that prayer several times. Then I stopped and I thought, in light of this, because it was still fresh in my mind, I thought, why am I so much asking God to use me? And I wanted to be honest with myself. What's my motive behind that prayer? Do I want to feel good that God's hand is upon me? And boy, all of a sudden it dawned on me that I'm using God and His ministry to make me feel good. And as I was on my way, I started saying, "Lord, forgive me for my filthy, wrong attitude." And as I reached there, I found myself praying, "Lord, whether you use me or not, this is something trivial, this is something secondary. What really matters is that you'll speak to these people." And boy, what a release from God I experienced that, whether I'm used or not, that's something secondary. What is our motive? That's point 3. Point 4. He's learning to think positively, to expect great things from God and to attempt great things for God. He's learning to pursue tackling obstacles and above all aiming to know God. 5. He is learning to acknowledge his feelings and to choose the right attitude. That's the one I'm going to go to next when we finish reading this page. 6. In relating to the saved and unsaved, he's learning to build relationships by constructing bridges and destroying barriers. 7. In his commitment to the Great Commission, he is learning to relate to all the unsaved around him through proclamation and or affirmation. And the affirmation is not out of fear, but out of wisdom. 8. He is learning to overcome his fear of being vulnerable in terms of rejection or humiliation through turning to God by faith, remembering that God has fully loved and accepted him. I want to make a point on this, just a comment on point 8. In Genesis 3:10, let me read it for you. And he said, so we start with verse 8, "And they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man and said to him, "Where are you?" And he said, "I heard the sound of thee in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself." Larry Crabb says, in this verse we see three essential things, or three important things. We see a core emotion, which is fear, a core motivation, and a core strategy. Now, emotions have strong motivational power. And when a person is afraid, he can do one of two things. Either he shrinks like a turtle. When it's afraid, somebody approaches the turtle, it shrinks under the shell. Or, in our case, fear could be an instrument to drive us to rely more on God. Now, nobody wants to be naked. And nakedness, I don't mean the physical aspect. It means becoming vulnerable, being transparent. Because I'm afraid if you really see me the way I am, you will be shocked. So why should I be transparent? So it's easier to put on a mask and deceive people and think I am deceiving God, and perhaps for a while deceive myself. And when I'm discipling in that context, relationships are artificial. We do the mechanics of it, but there is no genuine relationship, no place for friendship. I was surprised one day when I thought that I have been a severe stumbling block to a brother of mine when he saw I had a conflict with my wife one day. Later on, years later, he told me, "I'm glad I found you were a human being like us." But you know, kind of the being daring to admit, you know, something. It's tough, but God can use it for His glory. What I want to say about this is, for instance, suppose one of us is thinking of going to Morocco or to Algeria or to Tunisia, and perhaps you've never been there. Most probably you'll feel scared. To be afraid is normal. If you're not afraid, there's something wrong with you. Now, what do you do with that fear? That fear could either kind of make you like, tied with ropes, or it can make you go to God, admit your fear, and tell Him, "In you I have all what I need." Fear is a gift from God that can drive you to Him, or it can make you paralyzed, depending upon your attitude, what you do with it. 9. He's learning to be free from self in order to worship God, serve others, sacrifice, and carry responsibilities. I believe freedom is the basis of all these things. 10. He is learning to become aware of the many choices that he has, especially in the realm of attitudes, thus learning to become free from pressure or compulsion. I'll come back to this point as well after I go to point 5. 11. He's learning to see self, others, circumstances from God's perspective. Learning to always give thanks. I believe when a person can give thanks to God, he has accepted the situation. Somebody told me once, he said, there's a big difference between asking the Lord the question, "Why, O God?" and the question, "What do you want to tell me, Lord?" The difference between the why and the what is tremendous, although there is a place for the why at times. B. Learning to have a positive mental set about suffering as a major tool in bringing about maturity of character. For me, one of my favorite books in the Bible is the book of Job, which was one of the most misunderstood books for me. I used to hear my mother say, when she's impatient with us when we were kids, she would say, "Ya sabr Ayyub." In other words, "Oh, I wish I have the patience of Job." Then I came to know the Lord, and one day I started reading about Job, and I expected him to be a very patient man. And I thought, he's not patient at all. And then with all these discourses between him and these friends, and I never enjoyed it. Until in a book, and that's where I feel the value of books other than the Bible. In a book I read an outline for the book of Job, and that outline just gave me an idea of how to go about reading that book. And from that time on, it became one of my favorite books of the whole Bible. Now, a key verse I want to share with you from that book is Job 1:8. God said to the devil, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him. He is a man who's perfect," etc. I know it in Arabic. هل جعلت قلبك على عبد أيوب لأن ليس مثله على الأرض رجل كامل ومستقيم يتقي الله ويحيد عن الشر. And to me this is amazing. God is volunteering Job to the devil. We kind of think, Lord, please deliver us from temptations. But God here is volunteering His servant to be tempted. How would you understand this? I remember in the good old days when I used to teach in Tripoli, Lebanon. One day I was having breakfast with a teacher, and that teacher was teaching private lessons and making lots of money. One day he said, "Why do you waste your time with these boys, doing Bible study with them, etc.? These are teenagers, they are very emotional. Actually, you're happy because you have convinced them to become born again like you. If I were you, I'll make money." Then he put the challenge finally. He said, "Well, I'm willing to sit with any of your boys for half an hour and I'll make out of him a communist." So I said, "Okay, why don't you sit with Kamil Shalhoub?" And I mentioned a particular student who was a good student. He accepted the Lord 6 months earlier. His life was committed to the Lord. He was spending daily time in the Word. He was witnessing to his friends, and I knew he was solid. That's the man I suggested. And the conversation was finished. 2 hours later, I hear somebody knocking at my door strongly, and there comes Kamil. He says, "I have been witnessing to Mr. So-and-so for the last 1 hour and a half." Well, why did I suggest this man? Because I was sure of him. If you are in a crisis, the devil wants us to feel that God has forsaken us. If we are in a crisis, if we're not reaping for what we have done, I'm saying if the devil is making it tight for us, it's God's way of telling you, "I'm proud of you. I'm sure of you." That crisis is the fire which is going to make you 24 carats gold. Because without fire, there will be no purification. Actually, Job was completely dedicated to God in chapter 1, and he thought he was fantastic. But his dedication was according to his vision. His vision of God was, God is a powerful energy up there. You've got to appease him to get along well with him. So you need to offer sacrifices, you need to live well, otherwise he might get angry with you, and one day, boy, you might suffer for it. That was his vision of God. And according to that vision, he was completely dedicated. But God wanted to expand his vision. And so he allowed the devil, which the devil is like a dog that has a rope around its neck. God determines how long that rope is. So God allowed the devil to bring about suffering to Job. And as he went through the fire, he began seeing himself as he truly is. He began seeing that his vision of God is wrong. And the main problem, the discourse with his friends, just briefly, is that these people assumed that Job has did something sinful. They came to encourage him, supposedly to encourage him. But how did they encourage him? They sat with him for 3 days without saying a word. Even if a man is healthy, he will become sick after 3 days of introspection. And then they began telling him, "Well, we don't know of anybody who suffers and who hasn't committed sin. So Job, we thought you were a good man. It seems your secret life is different from what we know." And as they talked to him more and more in that, he began getting inside. And if you read chapter 29 and count how many personal pronouns there are there, you'll find there are 29 personal pronouns in 25 verses. By chapter 38, God started speaking, and he shook him, and he told him, "Come on, shake yourself from that self-pity." And then Job says, "Lord," in 42, "I have known you by the hearing of the ear. Now I have seen you." I see Job in chapter 1 as a child, like 1 John chapter 2. Children, young men, fathers, Job 1 and children are the same. His vision is, I am here, God will bless me. If I pray, He will bless my children. Here I am, and God revolves around me to bless me, to heal me, to make my children be successful in school, to make the fields prosperous this year. Here he is, and God goes around him. Now in 42:5, he sees himself as, how foolish I was. You are there, you're the center, and I've been proud and self-centered. Forgive me, O God. And he kneels down, and he recognizes that Christ or God is the center, and he revolves around him. That's a young man. That's a disciple. Then in that same chapter, verses 10 and 11, the amazing thing is that God tells the friends, He says, I won't accept your prayer. I will never listen to you unless my servant, faithful servant, Job, will pray for you. And you begin wondering, here they go, these three men who have been accusing him for weeks. He hasn't been able to sleep. He can't sleep actually, all these ulcers in his body. He has had a hard time from circumstances, from his wife, from his best friends. And now God tells him, these people come and tell him, will you pray for us? We feel so deprived. Now it's his opportunity to say, okay, I'll show you what it is like to suffer. Like Joseph did with his brothers. I want you to toast a little bit, just to show you how you made me feel. But I don't think he did this. The amazing thing about Job, he forgot about his pain. He still hadn't slept for many days. He's still in pain. And he begins praying, oh God, please answer my prayer. Please heal these people. Please answer their prayers. He forgot himself and started being concerned about others. That's Job 42 verses 10 or 11. I don't remember. And it says, God returned to him all what he lost, double. He reached fatherhood when he forgot about himself and started being concerned about others and their concerns. So you see, a child is a person who thinks the earth is the center of the solar system, and God revolves around him. It's a perspective. Who is God? He's there to bless me. He's there to forgive me. He's there to answer my prayers. He's there to help me succeed in my exams, to help me solve my problems. So God there is like a gateman, or like a servant, as it were. He's there to, an agent to help. But once that person becomes wise enough to recognize that the sun is the center of the solar system and the earth revolves around it, he becomes a disciple. Now, once that person revolves around a young Christian along with God, the young Christian still feels he's the center of everything. So here you have a father who's willing to revolve around this young Christian, and God is revolving with him around that young Christian. He begins enjoying fatherhood. So that's, I think, when we're going through suffering, just to remember Job 1:8 is a very consoling thing. And when he says about him, Job, that he is perfect is a relative term. I can look at a tree where there is an apple tree. I look at an apple which looks big, nice shape, no place for worms, but it's still very green. It's not ripe. I can say it's a perfect apple, but it's not a ripe apple. It needs sun rays and more watering to make it ripe. So that's what God is saying about Job. And I hope He's saying about all of us. We're perfect in this sense. God has done all what it needs through the redemption through Christ. But we need fire. And crisis, where's Peter? Crisis is important. These are gifts that God uses, although the devil brings them in our way. But these are the things that God uses to produce character, to produce 24-karat gold. C, developing the conviction that Christ is on the throne and that He is sovereign. I love Revelation 4:1 and 2 on that. 12, he's learning to be actively involved as a creative and constructive citizen, developing a national and an international awareness with a keen sense for social justice. Learning to be exposed to a variety of issues in political, economical, social and religious realms. I think a Christian should be a good reader. And he should read broadly, not just in one field. B, learning to take a stand regarding these issues based on biblical foundations. And that's hard. I came to know a certain young lady who was in the Philippines. She's a navigator. She was a navigator, but she said, I found that some Christians are, not willing to risk by thinking through things enough. I don't know how to express, but I mean, she said, when we had to go and sit on the street between the army of Marcos and the people that were in a certain building that were trying the coup d'etat, we didn't know whether we will die or not. But she said, I would ask people questions, and nobody was, wanted to go a step on to find answers to hard questions. They are ready to give me black and white answers to questions, but I found very little help when it came to gray issues. Should I get involved in a thing like this or not? And I really respected her. And the way she participated, she was a good citizen. And I've read the letters to her parents. Her parents live in Egypt, and she was corresponding with them. The running theme of all her letters was for the glory of God. She could sense certain communists that were trying to take advantage of the situation and infiltrate. And she would say, I know that some people are going to try to take the advantage of the situation. But somehow she could see herself as a good citizen. I haven't experienced that, but I feel somehow that I have missed something in life in this. As I said in the morning, this is the hardest issue to me in the whole page. But anyway, see developing convictions and values that are firm yet flexible. Before I go into point 5, I would like to hear your comments or any questions or any suggestions for change that I would really like to reconsider. Yes?
You may want to get back to this after you get to point 5.
If he's in my ministry, you say...
Or if it's somebody you meet, or you personally meet.
I find, like these days when I'm invited to preach, I love to preach on these items. This is what every one of them I love to preach on. Some I'm prepared on, others I'm not yet. But after meetings, people come and talk to me, and then it is natural to kind of talk with them according to... I don't know if I answered your question. Yeah. Any comments, any suggestions? If not, we can go on to point 5. He is learning to acknowledge his feelings and to choose the right attitudes. I believe feelings is a very hard subject, and to many people it's a very misunderstood subject. I remember Walden Scott in the early days, he noticed that I get hurt easily. So he told me, Nabil, develop a thick skin and thin heart. And I never forgot that statement, but I always found it hard to practice it. Well, that's a slogan which is nice. But how do I go about developing thick skin so that I don't get hurt easily? Why, that's a tough one. I know I should do it, but how do I go about doing it? And when I do have it, I get hurt easily. What should I do? Should I collapse and give up? Or how can I get up? I feel that's where Crab helped me. Crab said there are two tendencies for people, either to suppress their feelings or to be carried by their feelings, and both are wrong. You might have a husband and a wife, and they start an argument. The husband is carried by his feelings, and he feels angry, so he shouts at his wife. The wife feels she's a very good Christian, she shouldn't get angry with him, so she suppresses. And after a while, if you give her a long time, she might crack. Or one day for a little thing, and all of a sudden tears begin coming down, and she starts shouting, and he's surprised. What did I say? What wrong did I do? Well, it wasn't big the last time, but it has been collecting for months or maybe for weeks. The man, on the other hand, might psychologically be healthy because he lets these feelings go out, but he's hurting people and he's never learning to deal with his feelings properly. Are feelings wrong? There are some sinful feelings which are wrong, like bitterness and resentment, but there are some godly feelings that are very painful, like Jesus when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane. His feelings were really, really hurting. He was, we'll come back to it, but he was wishing he will die before Friday comes. نفسي حزينة جدا حتى الموت. My soul is so sad to the point of I like to die now. Or when you see him in that temple and all these people selling and buying and this, the temple where God's glory is supposed to be there, and there, he's inside. The righteous indignation eating him from inside. If you ask him, how do you feel, Lord Jesus? Is he going to tell you, I feel good? He was feeling terrible. And so there are some painful godly feelings and there are some joyful godly feelings, and both are great. And when feelings are there, this is an indication from God that we can do something. Like a person who's afraid, either the fear will drive me to becoming paralyzed or the fear will drive me to go to God. If I don't feel, I won't do anything. The same thing with pain. If there is no pain, a man might die with cancer before reaching the hospital because he doesn't complain. He doesn't go to a doctor. So if a person doesn't feel, he might never have the opportunity to think through and say, Lord, are you trying to tell me something? So praise God, we have feelings. Now what should we do with our feelings? I'm talking about painful, godly feelings. The right thing to do is to acknowledge them, acknowledge feelings, and secondly, choose the right attitude. Acknowledge means consider them as legitimate. It is not wrong to have painful feelings. But at the same time, choose the right attitude. And I've chosen my words. Acknowledge feelings and choosing right attitudes. One day, Barbara, after helping Farid for a couple of hours in preparing for an exam, she had a headache. And then he went on studying on his own, and he was really kind of despairing that day. So he told her, after 2 hours, it was, after studying for about 4 hours, he told her, I'm fed up. I feel I'm going to fail in this exam. I am tired with school. I feel like throwing my books from the window. Barbara really got mad at him. She wanted to start shouting at him and telling him, look, do you think you're the only one who's studying? Call any of your friends and you'll find they're just like you. But she remembered this thing and kind of held herself, prayed secretly to God, and then told him, Farid, I really respect you for your tolerance. I helped you for 2 hours and I've been having a headache since then. I don't know how you can study all these hours. And she told him this, and you know what he did? Right away he hugged her and he said, I'll go and study some more. So she told him, that's enough. But what I'm trying to illustrate, when a person is filled inside with emotions, it's hard for him to choose right attitudes. Now, if he acknowledges them, if he recognizes that he's a normal person, that feelings are legitimate, and then go a step further and say, Lord, what attitude do you want me to choose? Then it is easier for him to choose. Another illustration, suppose I'm taking this son to school, and in Egypt they have to wear a uniform, grey trousers and wine color jackets. What's the color you call it?
Burgundy.
Okay, Normandy. Well, anyway, suppose he's in the car with me and he says, I am tired and fed up of these colors. Do I have to wear a uniform every day to school? Now, as a typical father, what should I do? I should start defending the school. No, you should, and they are very good. And so here we are, like, two opponents arguing about this lousy uniform. And so he reaches the school. He's not just the enemy of the school, he's my enemy as well. Well, if I can help him acknowledge his feelings, it becomes easier for him to choose the right attitude. What am I supposed to do? What I am supposed to do is, for instance, to say, well, Farid, if I were you and I have to wear the same clothes every day, I'll be fed up with them. You're right, son. And he's surprised. He's expecting me to argue with him. Then he says, they look terrible. Why don't they let us wear jeans? And I say, man, it would be cheaper for us to buy you jeans. You're right. And he says, sometimes I like to play with my tennis shoes. Why don't they allow us wear tennis shoes, and have these shoes, in school? I said, man, you're right. With tennis shoes you can play football better. And So he finds I am an ally, not an enemy. Now, by the time we reach school, I tell him, but son, these are the rules of the school. What attitude are you going to choose? Are you able to go into that school today thanking God? Or are you going to be defeated? Now, it's a hard thing for a person to choose the right attitude when he's inside, all charged up. When a person acknowledges his feelings, he's released, and it becomes easier for him to choose the right attitude. Now, how do we acknowledge our feelings? We don't go around telling people. With a child, it's fine. The best way to acknowledge feelings is to go to God. And let's take a good illustration. Let's open to Lamentations chapter 3, one of my favorite chapters that shows me the heart of Jeremiah. Lamentations chapter 3. And if somebody could read to us verses 1 to 20 and see how Jeremiah is trying to acknowledge his feelings. Let's remember something before we read. Jeremiah had an awful kind of job. If you want to say, a hard, tough calling, I think one of the toughest calling you can imagine a person could have is the calling of Jeremiah. He was called to proclaim to Judea that you must surrender. God has sent the enemy to conquer us. Now, would a person like this be a popular person? I think he will be a very much hated person. Usually countries are trying to raise the morale of their people. For instance, if you listen to the news about Iran and Iraq news say that they have attacked and captured 50 and killed 100, and I don't know how many guns they have destroyed, how many planes they have hit. And they don't mention one Iraqi who was caught a prisoner. Why? They want to raise the morale of the Iraqis. Now, if you listen to the Iranians, it's the other way around. They've captured so many Iraqis, and they've killed so many, and they have shot so many planes, and they haven't lost just one Iranian. Each country is trying to raise the morale of its people. And here comes Jeremiah. He says he's sent by God, although all the other prophets say just the opposite. They say, we're going to win. Only this man, who is a negative thinker, he hasn't read any of the books of Norman Vincent Peale, he comes with bad news. When everybody is encouraged and we're going to win the war, here comes this man. You better surrender. God told me to tell you, you better surrender. So he was hated by everybody. Whenever he comes into a room, here comes bad news. And several times Jeremiah wanted to resign from that job. Lord, why did you send me? Why didn't you send somebody else? Why did you happen to give me this ugly message I have to carry to these people? And in one of his hard moments, he said these words, 1 to 20. Listen to what he said. Could somebody please read for us aloud?
I am the man who has seen affliction because of the rod of his wrath. He has driven me and made me walk in darkness and not in light. Surely against me he has turned his hand repeatedly all the day. He has caused my...
Starting with verse 36. 26:36. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I go yonder and pray. And taking with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me. And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. Now when he says, watch with me, and going a little further, he fell on his face and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, I go back. And taking with him Peter and John, the son of Zebedee, he began to sorrowful and trouble. Then he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me. Now when we say sorrowful even to death, suppose we try to go under the skin of Jesus. How did he feel? Most probably his thinking was, well, tomorrow this Pilate, who I know is trying to please the Jews and the Romans, this Herod who's like a fox, these soldiers that will be half drunk, my disciples that I poured my life for them 4 years, they're going to be scared and leave me. And not only that, I'm going to be blamed with the sins of humanity to the degree I'm going to carry on my shoulders the filth of the world. Father, I know we have agreed from eternity, you and the Holy Spirit and I, about your purpose for this world. And I, by my own choice, I chose to become a human being, but now I find it very hard. Somehow could you find another way? I feel like dying right now. He was acknowledging his feelings. Then right away he said, but not my will, let thy will be done. He chose the right attitude. So even Jesus acknowledged his feelings. At a conference, I was speaking, conference of couples, about this. And then I said, I encourage you to go and write a letter to God. Tell him everything. Tell him, describe to him in detail. And don't worry, you're going to tear that letter later. Acknowledge your feelings to God, but before you forget, go right away, right after that, and ask God, what attitude, Lord, do you want me to choose? I knew later on of a certain young wife who went by the seaside, sat there, and for a long time she sat there and cried. She didn't write the letter, but she just cried to the Lord. And she told him about her husband. I don't know the details, but maybe she said to him, Lord, why did you have me marry this man? He's so selfish. And she told him everything, and she cried and will tell him and cry, etc. And finally, she said, okay, Lord, what do you want me to do? What kind of attitude do you want me to have? And so she began thanking God for that husband. And then she said, Lord, what do you want me to do? So afterwards, she went and spoke with her husband. And I heard that for a long time, this was the first time they speak without having a problem. Why? Because she was released from inside. In the past, he will be full and she will be full, and when they talk, they end up in a conflict bigger than the original one. But after acknowledging her feelings to God, she could talk objectively with her husband. Shall we pray? And then we'll have a little break, then we'll take another topic. Could someone please lead us in prayer?